Now, Heather finally makes her way back home to find her father, Harry Mason, appears to have been violently murdered. Heather has crossed the Rubicon, as it were, and there is no turning back now. Her father has been assassinated, and she is left with immense grief, but also she's desperately trying to make sense out of what is happening. As terrible as it is to say this, without the sacrifice of Harry Mason, there would most certainly be no reason at all for Heather to be lured any further into Silent Hill. This is exactly what must be done in order to control her and lure her further into a succession of dark rituals leading up to the birth of God in the physical realm. Heather follows the blood trail to the rooftop of her apartment building where she confronts Claudia. Claudia offers 2 reasons for the death of Harry Mason. She tells Heather the first reason was revenge for the Order's efforts being destroyed 17 years ago. Claudia then mentions the other reason, which is to fill Heather's heart with hatred. Heather takes the bait, of course, just having witnessed the aftermath of her father's savage execution. She does what any normal human being would do. She lashes out at Claudia and threatens to get her. This is exactly the reaction that Claudia wants, because it is far easier to control people by manipulation through their basic animal instincts. It's a tactic quite common in advertising, the news, social media. It's really just about everywhere. Just as I mentioned earlier in the series, in dark magic ceremonies, the responsibility of the action is placed on the doer of the specific task or ritual, not the orchestrator of the plan, not the creator of the plan. In a court of law, such a defense would not hold up, of course, as Claudia is most definitely a party to this crime. However, the rules are different according to dark Luciferians, and it is one's own personal responsibility to master their inner world, protecting themselves from the dark manipulations of others. Should an individual fail to develop their inner dimensions enough to free themselves from the manipulations of others, it is not the fault of the manipulators, but the fault of those who succumb to taking the actions that they are told to do. Remember, free will is of the highest importance in this regard. And so, with the sacrifice of Harry Mason, Claudia has accomplished what is arguably the second most important phase of this dark set of rituals. It is Heather, after all, who must freely decide on her own whether or not to pursue Claudia. Through Heather's own instincts of anger and hatred at the killing of her father, she is being manipulated by the Order, just as Claudia openly admits to her a few moments earlier. Douglas tells Heather that revenge doesn't solve anything. But of course, this isn't enough to break Heather free from the manipulations of the Order. Heather is the most necessary part of this ritual after all, and she can put a stop to it simply by leaving. Douglas then comments that he is partly responsible in the sense that he was hired by Claudia to find Heather. Had it not been for that fact, these events would not have unfolded as they have. Just after Douglas tells Heather that revenge doesn't solve anything, she takes a moment to wonder if her father would be mad at her for acting upon her hatred by seeking revenge. This seems to infer that Harry may have been able to spot the manipulations of the Order, having survived a previous encounter with them more than 17 years ago. And now it seems Douglas shares the same sentiment and has stepped in to become the spiritual successor of Heather's father. And so now, just as with the first Silent Hill game, we have the father figure and the daughter making that fateful drive to Silent Hill once again. Only this time, the dangers are far more apparent. Douglas Cartland represents an amalgam of both Sybil Bennett and Harry Mason embodied in just one character archetype. It really is the same story again, as the hero's journey most certainly is, albeit presented in a somewhat different way. The appearances and characters may seem different, but the underlying themes, motives, and storylines are actually quite similar. Just a little fun fact about reality. The source of all things that really matter the most in our lives are completely invisible. Love, wisdom, joy, etc. appear on a superficial level of reality at best, which means it meets our five senses in a certain way. But in actuality, the world we truly inhabit remains hidden or occulted. As Douglas and Heather begin the drive to Silent Hill, Heather starts filling Douglas in on what she knows about the fateful events of her birth 17 years ago. With Harry's death, Douglas Cartland most obviously fills the role of Heather's main ally in the story now. Shortly after arriving in Silent Hill, Douglas admits to Heather that he's afraid. Douglas has no good reason to continue helping Heather other than his conscience won't allow him to give up. In the very next moment after Douglas exits the scene, the deep and dark vulnerability of his predecessor, Harry Mason, is revealed. This is yet another indication of Douglas as the torchbearer for Harry Mason and the character archetype that both men share. Just like Douglas, Harry was confused and afraid by the situation he was forced into after the unusual birth of Heather. In the notebook that Douglas hands to Heather, Harry admits that he even considered abandoning her, or even worse. As discussed earlier in this video, however, Harry did not allow his lower instincts of fear to override his higher self. The conscience of Harry Mason won a hard-fought victory over his base instincts, just as Douglas is doing as well.